In a previous video, we made a pivot table of some data, and now we're going to turn that data into a pie chart. So if we go to Excel, so we left off in a previous video making a pivot table of our data, and I'm going to uncheck the blank here again. So we have our frequency table here, and we have to summarize the data in a frequency table before we make anything out of a pie chart. Excel is not smart enough to turn our raw data into a pie chart on its own. So first we make the pivot table. Now, the one thing that I don't like about Excel is that if you leave the data in the pivot table, you have the way that the pie charts are displayed is not really to my preference. So if you want more display options and for it to display more sort of normally, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste this data, and I'm going to paste it using the paste options as values. That will break the connection between the pivot table and the pivot chart tool, and it will give me access to the other graphing options. The other thing it allows me to do is to adjust the headers more easily. So instead of row labels here, I'm going to put the name of the variable. And instead of count of age here, I'm just going to put count or frequency. The other thing to kind of keep in mind is when we make graphs, we don't want to include the totals in our graphs, especially for pie charts. If you include the grand total column here, it will take up half your graph and none of your percentages will be correct. So I'm going to remove the grand total line from my data because I don't need it to make my pie chart, just to remind myself that it shouldn't be in the graph. Now, if I highlight what's left, then to make my pie chart, I'm going to go to Insert. Now, if you select recommended charts, you'll get a list of different kinds of options that Excel recommends for this data. They may be good, they may not be good. Since we know we're going to make a pie chart here, we can just select the pie. Now, some things to kind of keep in mind here. It says more pie charts. We can click on that. Some things to kind of keep in mind here is that we want to choose a graph display that is going to be easy to read, not necessarily one that looks pretty just because it looks pretty. So the donut chart and the pie chart basically have the same properties. You can use either one. The one that you want to specifically avoid is the 3D pie chart, because the perspective in a 3D pie chart will tend to make your graph attractive, but more difficult to interpret the values. And so avoid that from a statistics standpoint, a good data visualization standpoint. If you have a lot of categories, these two graphs, pie of pie or bar of pie, can also be useful, but we only have 4 categories here, so there's no need to do that. I'm just going to select the default pie chart option and then hit OK. Now, the default display of the pie chart is not necessarily what statisticians would call a good graph. We don't really want count as the name of our graph. At a minimum, we would want to say age categories. It is okay to say a pie chart of age categories, but labeling a pie chart as a pie chart is not necessary. But we're displaying the various age categories. There's a legend on the bottom, which is fine. We can use that, or we can choose an option that will display the labels directly on the pie slices. What we are also still missing is that we are missing percentages displayed on each pie slice. Again, partly because we want the graph to be easy to read. We can certainly eyeball that this blue category between 20 and 40 is the largest category, but what about these 2 categories? How much different are they? So the percentages will be useful. So there's different ways that we can add that element to our graph. The quick layout options, some of them have different options for displaying here. The category labels are displayed on each slice. which instead of a legend, which is fine. Here, only the percentages are displayed. This one is also relatively decent. We can do that. These options, some of these options up here along the top, also some of them have percentages on each slice. We do want to be careful if we have a lot of categories. Sometimes the percentages will print over each other, and we want to make sure that the options are easy to read. The other way to just add them directly and have a little bit more control over them is to use the add chart element, which you can access here or in this plus button right here. So if I add chart element, I want to add data labels, and I am going to select more data label options. Now, the default when you add data labels is that's going to display the value, which is the counts from our table. And that's not necessarily what we want in a pie chart. Instead, we would prefer the percentages to be displayed. And then the other option that we have is we can position them. So we can put them in the center of the pie slice. That's an option. We can put them on the inside edge. We can put them just on the outside of each slice, or the best fit option is another way that Excel is going to try to choose which option it likes. We can also change things about the display, like the number of decimal places and things like that, but we're not going to worry about that at the moment. That's not essential for a good graph. So what we have now is a good graph. Incidentally, if you have a really busy graph, like it has more than 5 or 6 slices, and sometimes the data will overlap each other. If you click on the data, you can drag these around to, again, if they overlap with each other, that's bad. You need to be able to read the graph. So you can use this option to drag these things around and change where they're displayed. And then Excel will, in some cases, put these little lines next to them to make them easier to read. If that's necessary to do, because they're overwriting each other, then you can make that change. So let's just go back to where we had it originally. But this is a good graph display. It has a descriptive title. It tells you what it's graphing. You have all the percentages displayed here. You have a legend that gives you the values of each category. This is a good pie chart. And it's not, and again, the important thing is it's not too busy either. The rule of thumb is not to use more than 7 categories. If you try to use too much data on there, then that's what those breakout options were, the pie of pie or the bar of pie graphs. That will help if you have a lot of little categories, it will lump them together and then break those down in a side display. But this is our good pie chart.